Try to remember being 2 years old. You can't. Nobody can. And the reason why is stranger than you think. Not because you were too young to experience anything. You were experiencing everything. Every face, every sound, every sensation hitting your nervous system for the very first time with a clarity and intensity that adults will spend the rest of their lives chasing and never quite finding again. You were there. Completely there. Present than you have ever been since. And then it's just gone. Psychologists have a name for it. They call it infantile amnesia. And for over 100 years, scientists have been trying to explain why the most formative period of your entire life leaves almost no retrievable trace in your memory. Why the years that shaped everything. Your attachment style, your emotional baseline, your earliest understanding of whether the world is safe or dangerous are completely invisible to you now. The answers they've found are not what anyone expected. Most people assume babies don't remember because babies don't think. The lights are on, but nobody is home yet. That assumption is wrong. By the time you were born, your brain had already been developing for 9 months. Your hearing came online at around 18 weeks in the womb. You were listening to your mother's voice, her heartbeat, the muffled sounds of the world outside, long before you took your first breath. Researchers have shown that newborns can recognize their mother's voice at birth, not because they learned it after they arrived, but because they already knew it. You were learning before you were born. In the first year of life, your brain forms roughly 1 million new neural connections every single second, not per minute, per second. You were not switched off. You were running at full capacity. So why can't you remember any of it? Here is where the first answer comes in, and it is not the one most people expect. You couldn't remember it then either. Memory is not a single system. Your brain runs multiple memory systems simultaneously, and they do not all come online at the same time. There are 2 types of memory that matter here. The first is implicit memory, procedural, emotional, the kind of memory that lives in your body rather than your mind. How to walk, how to reach for something, the feeling of being held. Implicit memory forms from birth, possibly before, and it runs constantly without you ever being aware of it. You have never forgotten how to feel safe in someone's arms. You just can't tell anyone when you learned it. The second type is explicit memory, declarative, conscious, the kind of memory you can actually access and describe. This is the memory system that fails in infancy, not because it doesn't exist yet, but because it depends on a structure your brain hasn't finished building. That structure is the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as the brain's memory indexer. It does not store memories directly. What it does is take the raw experience, the sights, the sounds, the emotions, the context, and binds them together into a single coherent episode. Without the hippocampus doing its indexing work, experiences happen but they don't stick. They leave no address. No way to find them again. In infancy, the hippocampus is not finished. It is one of the last brain structures to fully mature. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. It is that even the memories that did form during infancy got actively dismantled afterward. In the late 2000s, neuroscientist Paul Frankland discovered something remarkable in mice. Young mice showed exactly the same infantile amnesia pattern as humans. They formed memories but couldn't retrieve them later. And when Frankland looked at why, he found the answer in neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons. In infancy, the hippocampus is generating new neurons at an extraordinary rate, and those new neurons, as they integrate into the existing network, disrupt the connections that held earlier memories together. They don't just add capacity, they overwrite. They crowd out the old filing system before it ever had a chance to organize itself. Your brain was growing so fast that it was destroying its own records as it went. You didn't have the words. Language is not just a tool for communication. It is a tool for memory. When something happens to you, the act of putting it into language, telling the story, giving it a beginning, middle, and end, is part of what locks the memory into a retrievable form. And without language, experience remains felt, but not formed. Present, but not preserved. Researchers studied children who had a medical procedure at around 2 years old, an experience unusual enough that it should have been memorable. When those children were interviewed shortly after, they could describe it. They had the memory. Then they were interviewed again, years later, once language had fully developed. Most of them remembered nothing. The file was there. The format was incompatible, and so the file was lost. Now here is where it gets more complicated, because infantile amnesia is not the same for everyone. Children who grow up in cultures with a strong oral tradition. Memory is not just something your brain does alone. It is something your culture teaches you how to do. The Maori people of New Zealand have the earliest recorded childhood memories of any cultural group ever studied. On average, Maori adults can recall events from around age 2.5. a full year earlier than the Western average. Parents and grandparents talk constantly with young children about the past. They narrate the child's own experience back to them. They build the story together. The child's memory becomes more retrievable because the child has been taught that their story matters and is worth keeping. You didn't just lose your early memories because of biology. You lost them in part because of the world you were born into and whether that world helped you build the scaffolding to hold them. And then there is the question that nobody fully knows how to answer. What happened to the you that was there? Because something was there. The infant who experienced those years was not nothing. They felt hunger and warmth and fear and joy. They recognized faces. They formed preferences. They developed the earliest version of what would eventually become a personality. Research on attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby in the 1960s and expanded on for decades since, shows that the quality of care you received in your first 2 years of life shapes your adult attachment style in ways that are remarkably persistent. Whether you find it easy or difficult to trust people, all of that was written in years you cannot remember. You are living with decisions made by a version of yourself you have no memory of. Think about what that means. The most important developmental period of your entire life happened to someone who shares your body and your history, but who you cannot remember being and cannot communicate with. The foundations of your emotional life, the patterns that govern how you love, how you attach, how you respond to threat and comfort, were laid by an infant who had no language, no narrative, no conscious sense of self. The wall is not a wall of forgetting. It is a wall of becoming. You were there for the whole thing. There is a version of you that tasted something for the first time and felt pure, undiluted astonishment at the flavor. A version of you that saw a face appear over the edge of a crib and felt something so close to relief that the word relief barely covers it. A version of you that heard music for the first time and did not know what music was and felt it anyway. Felt it somewhere that had no name for what it was feeling. First light, first warmth, first face, first word. First time someone picked you up when you cried and you understood, without understanding anything, that the world would answer you. None of it made it across. Not because it wasn't real, because the bridge hadn't been built yet. You carry everything they felt. You just can't remember any of it, and they are still in there somewhere. Underneath the narrator, underneath the words, underneath everything you think of as yourself, feeling things, without language for them, the same way they always did.